Hi, this is Kate, this is my channel, and this is my top books of 2017. Um, I've seen a lot of people doing, top 17 books of 2017, um, and that seems like a lot of work to get that specific and that, finding 17 books, it seems a little bit disingenuous. So I've literally just gone down my Goodreads list of books read, and I've just picked out the ones that I'm still thinking about, the ones that are still standing out in my mind as being the best, and that's left me with 9 books. I did try briefly to get something about, to try and get that 10th book so I could at least have 10, but there wasn't that stood out as much as these 9 did, so I'm picking 9 books that were the best that I've read in 2017. So the first book that I want to talk about, actually I'm going to be talking about them in the order that I read them, rather than this was the best book that I read this year. This is just the order that I read them in. So the first one that I read, I actually read this one in January of this year, which is Ninefox Gambit by Yoon. This is one of those books that I think intimidated a lot of people, because it was all about, maths and something called calendrical heresy. And I think the way to approach it is just to treat all this maths like magic and the calendrical heresy like their magic system, and just go with it, because really there's no other way to deal with this. They don't really try and explain it to you, and it essentially is magic. So just go with it, and you'll be treated to a really special military science fiction set in space with really cool and weird special effects, I suppose you would call them, and some really great characters that really stand out. I also read the second book, Raven Stratagem, this year, and while that book was also really amazing and possibly could have been the 10th book, this one just stood so far and above Raven Stratagem, possibly because this one blew me away so much, and then when I read Raven Stratagem I kind of had an idea of what to expect, so it wasn't quite so mind-blowing. But yeah, I really, really recommend both Ninefox Gambit and Raven Stratagem, but I think this one has a slight edge. The next book that I want to recommend I also read in January, so January was a really good reading month for me. This is an older book, but it's Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. This book was unexpected. It's about a Jesuit priest and a few others who go on an interstellar mission to following a audio recording that they've received from another world. And the main priest, Father Emilio, believes that he's on a mission from God, and God has selected him to go and do this mission. And it's not like cheesy, oh yeah, I'm so great. It's genuine religious feeling that God has chosen him. And then he gets there and nothing is right, and it's like he's been betrayed, and he loses his faith, and he's the only one who comes back to Earth from this mission because everyone else dies on this other planet. And everyone on Earth is trying to lay the blame on Father Emilio and is trying to figure out exactly what they can pin on him for what he's done wrong. And he doesn't care anymore because he's lost his faith, but he really does care. And it made me cry so hard on like a 40-degree day in Sydney where I'm just sweating, and I didn't have the moisture to lose, and yet I bawled. And I think the thing that stands out most in my mind is the fact that right from the beginning I knew what had happened. I knew. And I don't know if that's because I'm a woman or if it's just because I'm an astute reader, but I think maybe I was supposed to be surprised, just as the other priests were really surprised when Father Emilio finally admitted what happened. But I was surprised that they were surprised, because to me it was so obvious what had happened to Father Emilio and why he felt so worthless. But it's a book about religion without forcing religion on you. It's just, this is something that this dude believes, and it's about having your faith tested and your faith breaking your heart, and the loss of faith breaking your heart. So that's The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. The next book is one that I read for my book club, and that book is The Natural Way of Things by Charlotte Wood. It's not a book that I would usually read, but because it was for my book club, I did read it. It won the 2016 Stella Prize, which is like the Australian literary prize for women's fiction, or fiction by women. And this is an angry book. It's very, very Australian. It's very confronting, and I felt it. I felt it like deep in here, like something primal that, you know, it sort of felt like it connected me to the sisterhood of women, and we've suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered. Not that I personally have suffered, but the idea of woman as something that suffers and something that rages at suffering. And I think that's what it was. It was the rage at the suffering that is inflicted. So yeah, except for the last 10 pages. Don't read the last 10 pages. It turned into a completely different book and made me furious, and I threw it across the room and I was finished. So ignore the last 10 pages, but up until then, oh my God. The next book that I want to talk about is one that I don't know how to talk about because it's so completely different from everything I've ever read, and that is Too Late the Lightning by Ada Palmer, which is the first book in the Terra Ignota series. I haven't read the second one yet because I'm waiting for it to come out in an edition that matches this one so that they fit on the bookshelf together, which is petty, but that's just the way it is. This book blew me away. It's like nothing I've ever read before. It combines Enlightenment philosophy with Enlightenment language, but revolutionary styles of politics. Not like revolution, like we're going to have a revolution, but like utterly insane types of politics that are kind of a combination of micro-democracy and communism and socialism and fascism and oligarchy and all sorts of weird stuff that all sort of is thrown together, which makes no sense but runs perfectly. And then it's like a caper, like a scam caper, and they keep pulling the rug out from underneath you. And there was criticisms about this book about how it, the narrator forces gender identities on characters without their consent and without their agreement. Like, I'm going to call you a woman, and it doesn't actually matter if you're he or she, but I'm calling you she because XYZ. And when I was reading that, I thought that was really cool, the way it was explained, but reading the criticism of it, I see where it came from. I've never been a person who has been misgendered, so it wasn't something that came to my mind, but the criticism is that you're misgendering these characters, and that's not okay. You're forcing gender essentialism and your own ideas of what gender is onto these other people who are not you. And I think that's a legitimate criticism to make, and it hadn't occurred to me while I was reading it. So if that's something that's going to bother you, I'm going to say that this probably isn't a book for you. But it wasn't enough to dampen my enthusiasm for it because this book was awesome. It was amazing. And I don't recommend it to everybody because I think it's only going to be loved by a very specific kind of reader because it is so utterly bizarre and so completely out of left field. So Too Late the Lightning by Ada Palmer. The next book that I want to talk about, I don't have a physical copy of because I read it as an ebook, and it's a romance novel called When a Scot Ties the Knot by Tessa. I haven't read many romance novels for quite a while, and even when I was reading them, I wasn't really reading a lot of them. But this was just fun and light, and it combined, discussions about social anxiety with discussions of PTSD with female scientists in the Regency era and, natural history and, grudging respect. and it was silly and ridiculous, and I loved it so much while I was reading it. But even now, thinking back on it, it just makes me smile. So when Scot ties the knot by Tessa Dare. The next book I want to talk about, I also don't have a copy of because I've lent it to a friend who has also loved it. I just haven't got it back yet, and that is The Animators by Kayla Whittaker. This is also a book that I read for my book club, so again, not in my usual wheelhouse, but it was amazing. It was about a pair of female friends who are also creative partners who together they make animated film. And it was about female friendship and about love in female friendships and destructive behaviours in female friendships and the art of creation and whether or not who traumatic stories belong to. Do these women have the right to tell these stories in such a public forum, even though they were involved in them, but they weren't the only ones involved in them? And who do those stories belong to? Do they have the right to tell them? And it had the most amazing sense of place as somebody who doesn't really have much. I've been to America once. I liked it, but I don't, I'm not from there. I'm not part of that. But it was amazing. And the sense of place just rolled off the page and it just enveloped this whole story. There's kind of two places and both of them were really overwhelming in their sense of here we are, this is this place, and I could feel it. The next book that I want to talk about is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin, which is the third book in the Broken Earth trilogy. So the first two books won the Hugo Award 2 years in a row, and then this one came out this year, and this blew me away. Like, I was thinking, how am I going to review this book? And my only way to review it is to just go, like, that's it, that's all I can do, because this N.K. Jemisin can write, and she can write amazingly well, and this book, like the whole series, building up into this conundrum, and I couldn't figure out how she was going to deal with it, because to go with this way would betray the story, to go that way would betray the story, to do something in the middle would betray everything and undermine everything, and she somehow managed to navigate around all of that and come up with the most perfect solution. And she's doing all this experimental stuff with tense and point of view and character and style, and she's doing writing of something in between science fiction and fantasy, and it's just amazing. So that's The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. And then my last two books I'm going to talk about together because they're by the same author, set in the same kind of world, and they are Doomsday Book by Connie Willis and To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. I did a full review of Doomsday Book because it made me sob hysterically in a public park, and To Say Nothing of the Dog made me laugh so hard I nearly bit my pants. So these are both books that belong to the Oxford Scholar world. They're about time travel. Doomsday Book is about going back in time to the bubonic plague, and it is a tragedy, and oh my god, was it tragic. And To Say Nothing About the Dog is time travelling back to the Victorian era, and it is a slapstick comedy, and it was amazing. So, like, to have the same writer write in the same world, both books that are focused on such an obsessive reworking and reworking and reworking and going around and around and around with the same details again and again and again. So they're very similar in style, and yet they're able to produce such different emotional responses in the audience. I couldn't believe it. They are amazing, especially when put together as a pair, but even separately. So that's Doomsday Book and To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. And those are my top 9 books of 2017. I'm really looking forward to hearing what your books were, and most importantly, tell me why you liked them, because I think that's the most important part, is to be able to share your joy, but the reasons for your joy. What was so great about these books? What made them for you? So that I know if I want to read them too and be just as excited as you are about them. So my name is Kate, this is my channel, and this has been my top books of 2017. Bye.